Okay, so formally, hello everybody, as we're still getting people logging in. This is, as you're almost certainly aware, the third week of our PMBOK 7 short course on the Project Management Book of Knowledge, which does sound like the Bible. It feels like we're reading the Bible. This is a Bible studies group tonight. Welcome. This is presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name tonight is Shane Murphy. I'm the IT Masters Sales and Marketing Manager. Normally, you will be hearing, or you would have been hearing, the dulcet tones of Jack Stewart, our normal MC. But unfortunately, Jack is down with the good old COVID and has no voice. They left me a phone message today, which I could not hear, and texted me to demonstrate that they weren't unwell. So we're wishing Jack well this evening and wishing everybody else safe and wellness as well. And, you know, it's nice to see that people are coming in from everywhere. Uganda has just come through. Hi, Okot, sorry, from Uganda. We've seen a lot flash past. I only have a very small chat window. Sorry, body of knowledge, not book of knowledge. Thank you, Gary. It's always good to start off and get us on the right track. Straight up front, I'm surprised Karen didn't jump in. Your mentor, you know, tonight is Karen Wright, adjunct lecturer at CSU. Thanks for making it. And we better start with the usual housekeeping stuff. We encourage questions and we want you to ask lots of questions and chat away during the webinar, and we use two methods to do so. We would hope that you would ask all the questions that are actually about the slides and the subject that we're discussing tonight in the Q&A section of the webinar, and all the other sorts of stuff, admin, you can't see, you can't hear, you know, resource availability, etc. You can put that in the support team chat and we'll try and answer those as well as we're going along. Please set your chat to send to everyone, not just hosts and panelists, because we like everybody to be able to hear, because often there's really clever people in the audience, much cleverer than me, for example, who will be able to answer the questions for you before we can even get to it, because sometimes there's just so much stuff going on. We will have a big question and answer session at the end of the evening, and also a couple of smaller ones in between when we pause for a break. When it's particularly relevant, I might even interrupt Karen, although I'm loath to do that. Kit, of course, is here in her usual role, looking after us and making sure that everything runs smoothly. Without Kit, it would not run. Believe me, we've spent some time this evening, trying to make sure everything works. So thank you for coming along, Kit, and looking after us. And if you need all the other materials for the course later on, they'll be at learn.itmasters.edu.au. So all the links to the readings, the discussion forums and quizzes, and of course the slides from tonight will be up there in about 24 hours or so as well. And just finally, it would be remiss of me as the Sales and Marketing Manager not to remind you that this short course is derived from the material that's in our graduate certificate diplomas and master's degrees in project management, which have done, of course, from an IT focus and IT point of view. If you want to find out more about those, you can enroll for them. You can see what other project management short courses we have online. There's a few of them there. And just find out a little bit more about IT Masters. That'll be on our website, which is just itmasters.edu.au. And I'm sure you can find that for yourselves. And we'll be dropping more of that sort of information in as we go through the night. But yeah, I'm sure you've heard more than enough from me now. We've got plenty of people on board. We're 7 minutes in, and I'd really like to welcome Karen along and make her feel extra welcome in the chat.
Thank you, Shane, and hi everyone. I hope everyone is well tonight. Shane, I didn't pick you up on the body of knowledge. I was hoping a participant would do that, so well done, Gary. All right, so as Shane mentioned, this is our third webinar out of the 4 webinars in the series for PMBOK 7. And you will recall last week, for those of you who tuned in, that we did talk about the first 4 of the performance domains straight out of the guide to the project management body of knowledge. So in tonight's webinar, we're going to continue on with the guide. So that's that second section that I spoke to you guys about last week. And we're going to continue on with that this week. And we're going to cover the other 4 performance domains of project management. And then, of course, next week, we'll finish up with the third section of the BOK, which is dedicated to the tailoring So we all approach projects differently, and our project approach does need to be tailored to the kind of project that we're dealing with, and also to the organisation itself. And so therefore we use a number of different models, a number of different methods, and we create a number of different artefacts that will vary from one project to the next. So once we've gotten through these performance domains, we'll round out on that tailoring topic to finish out our short course. So tonight we've got those remaining sort of 4 performance domains. So let's get on with those. They are project work, project delivery, measurement, and uncertainty. So let's get started. So I'm going to deal with the first 2 together. I'm going to deal with project work and project delivery together, and then I'll separate the other 2 out. The reason I do that is because the project work domain is really associated with the work that we're going to do. So it's all of the activities and the functions that are associated with establishing the processes, managing the physical resources, and getting our environment right for our project. So that's all the stuff that we have to do. And of course, the delivery performance domain is about the actual results that we're going to create. And so as you know, we would know when we do the work, we get the results, hopefully. That's the idea anyway. And so the 2 can't be kind of looked at separately, totally separately anyway. So I'm going to try and combine them together for you a little bit, just to make it a bit easier to get through. Once we've concluded on those 2, I might stop and ask if there's any questions in relation to project work and project delivery as 2 performance domains. And then I'll head on and do the other 2, which are measurement and uncertainty. And I'll take a quick pause between those as well. You'll notice that we've got quite a few slides in our deck tonight. I did the same thing with last week as well. We won't get through them all in great detail. I've put them in there because they contain information that will be useful to you, and I guess just a little bit of extra stuff that you can reflect on after the webinar. And of course, if you've got any questions about them, you can always contact us as well, and we'll get back to you with some answers on things. So let's start with this project work performance domain firstly. So this is all about executing our project and actually doing the work. So last week we talked about all of the things we need to do to plan it and get it ready, and to decide our approach and decide how we were going to deal with it. This is actually then getting on and getting the work done. So quite closely aligned, for those of you who are familiar with the PMBOK 6, the previous version of the BOK, you will know that execution was a process group. It's similar to that, okay? So we're going to talk about project work performance domain and project delivery performance domain around that kind of stuff. So those of you who aren't familiar with BOKs at all, this is doing the work. So we're executing the project, we're doing the project work. If we're project managers, we're in the process of leading the team. And so obviously we want optimal performance out of our project team. We talked about setting up the project team structure and things like that last week in that particular performance domain. So now it's a matter of just making sure that team is working really well, efficiently and effectively towards the project goals. We also have to put in place all of our processes. Obviously, we need to follow organisational policies and procedures. We need to set up our appropriate communications networks between our stakeholders, and really making sure that we're making optimal use of our physical and our human resources as well. So anything that we might need to obtain outside the project or the project team, we'll usually cover through a procurement process. So we'll talk about that in this performance domain, and just making sure that, you know, our team has an established environment that is going to work for them, and that we might be prepared to make, or need to be prepared to make, some tweaks and changes, you know, in the event that the team's not performing as well as what we'd hoped. So sometimes we get project team members who perhaps don't have all the skills and the knowledge on the project when they get to the project that they're going to need for the project work. And so this is a process of making sure that, you know, everyone gets something out of the project, and that there is that continuous learning and continuous improvement in the project as well. So that's project work. And then we've got project delivery. So this is the functions and the activities associated with making sure that the scope of the project is delivered, and also that the quality outcomes of the project are met. All right, so this is, you know, making sure that that not just the work is done, which is the previous performance domain, but that it lives up to the quality standards that we've got in mind, and that the full scope of work that we had in mind for our project is actually delivered, that we haven't taken any shortcuts or, you know, missed out on sort of big pieces of work. So obviously, to execute this performance domain, we need to make sure that we've done a few different things. You've heard me talk about the business case or the strategic objectives of the organisation. We do need to make sure here that our project is in alignment with those as the project progresses. So sometimes, unfortunately, and it's never anyone's intention, I don't think, but sometimes, unfortunately, as we get going on our projects, you know, we tend to sort of drift a little bit. We can drift. We can get something called scope creep happening on our project, which is where, you know, things start changing before we actually get authorization and approval for those changes, and before you know it, you've got a project that's out of control. So whilst we may need to change the scope of our project, and we can do so, we should only do that in an authorized and controlled way. We also want to make sure that we're actually getting a quality product at the end of the day, that the benefits that we were hoping to achieve from the project are actually being realised within the time frame and within the budget constraints that we set ourselves in the planning performance domain, that the team continues to have a clear understanding of the requirements of the stakeholders as well, and that the stakeholders are actually accepting this product, service or result at the end, and that they're satisfied with it, that they're happy with it. And of course, we talked last week about the importance of engaging our stakeholders nice and early, so that there are no kind of ugly surprises when we get to the point where we're actually delivering the product and people go, oh, this is not what I wanted. Oh, I didn't think it was going to look like this. So we do need to make sure that, you know, we've set ourselves appropriate requirements and parameters for quality. But this delivery domain is about making sure that, you know, that we're doing the work that is necessary to achieve those. A little bit later on in the webinar, the next performance domain we're going to talk about is measurement, which is about how we make sure that we're doing that. And of course, the last one is uncertainty, which is, of course, navigating the choppy waters of project management. Bit of a William Shakespeare quote to start off with. Look, I actually don't know if this is truly a William Shakespeare quote, but I saw this photo, so I thought I'll grab it. Expectation is the root of all heartache. Unfortunately, that is true. And we talked about stakeholders the last couple of weeks, and we've talked about how they can be a bit of a finicky bunch, that they like things the way they want them, that they've got their own ideas and their own objectives and their own thoughts about what they're going to get from the project. It's really important that we can only promise what we can deliver. And so in the project work and the project delivery performance domain, we've got to make sure that we set really reasonable expectations for the stakeholders, and we really involve them in you know, understanding what constraints we're working with, and try to understand what their expectations are so that we can deliver to that. And where we don't think we can deliver to those expectations, that we make every effort to let them know really early on in the project, so that there's no, you know, nasty surprises at the end. As you've said there, Albert, managing expectations, exactly. The difficulty with it, though, is that quality means different things to different people. And the other difficulty is that if you run your project, you know, to the scope, to the schedule, to the budget, that's all great. But if you hand over a product, service or result that nobody wants, or isn't useful, or doesn't take the organisation, you know, forward in a strategic direction, then really, have you achieved anything at all? So nothing else really matters unless we can deliver a product, service or result that is useful. So the issue is, what's useful to me may be different to what's useful to you. I'd like to have a bit of a game with you guys, if you don't mind, because there's a few people on the webinar, so this could be fun. I want you to type just one word in the chat box that is synonymous for you with a quality pair of shoes. Try not to look at the chat box and see what everybody else is typing. Just type the first word that comes to your head when I say to you, a quality pair of shoes. What does that mean to you? Go for it, guys. Getting some answers, which is fantastic. What's even better is that it proves my point. The answers are all very, very different. Great, excellent. So you can see there that some of you have brands in mind, Some of you want to talk about the look or the aesthetics of the shoe. Some of you really want it to wear well and be long lasting. Some of you want it to be durable in particular conditions. Some of you are saying you want to heel. Some of you are saying you want it made out of leather. So, you know, if I try to produce for you a quality pair of shoes, and I presented all 280 of you with a pair of shoes that I deem to be quality, you can see how I might miss the mark, because I'm obviously not going to be able to achieve everything that you want. No sequins, says John. I might be able to achieve that, but you know, everything else is really subject to what you guys perceive to be the quality outcomes that you're looking for. So it's very difficult to pin quality down because it means different things to different people. Therefore, before we go sort of bolting ahead trying to create what we deem to be a quality product, it's really important to understand what the stakeholders think is a quality product. So we go through a process of kind of gathering requirements around our quality. There's just some quality definitions on this slide, and really this is just about getting everyone in your project team on the same page when it comes to what we mean by quality. So what we mean by quality isn't necessarily the grade, but it's the degree to which the product fulfills a set of characteristics. So, you know, is it leather? Is it strong and durable? Can it last for 10 years? Does it have sequins? You know, those sorts of things. And the requirement is what you guys have typed in the chat box. It's a need or an expectation that is either stated, generally implied, or obligatory. So sometimes it's not that the stakeholders want the product to be able to do this, that, or the other. It's that the law says it must, like it must meet an Australian standard, for example. What customer satisfaction means, what quality management means, and what quality control means as well. We've got three main parts to quality processes. These were the processes within the old PMBOK 6, but they're still very relevant to quality management today. And what it is quality planning. So obviously, you know, before we even start building a product at all, we need to know, you know, what are the characteristics that this or the requirements that this product needs to have. And making sure we really clearly understand what the stakeholders want, and we can really clearly identify, you know, what a quality product means. So it gives us something to strive towards. We've then got quality assurance, which is the way in which we build quality into the product. So it's all the steps that we take to ensure a quality build at the time of the build, which is sort of our project delivery performance domain. And then we've got quality control, which goes into the next performance domain I'm going to talk to you about this evening, which is the measurement one. So quality control is about making sure that you can measure the outcomes at the end and determine whether or not quality requirements have been fulfilled. Now, with the sequins, no sequins, that's really easy because I can just do a visual inspection and say, yep, it's got no sequins, so John's going to be happy with that. But for some of the others, like durability, well, how durable? You know, if it lasts for a year, is that durable enough? What about 3 wears? What about 10 years? Okay, so you can see a vast degree of difference there between, you know, one person's quality requirement and the next. So we need to obviously make sure that we've got a good understanding of what quality means. Now, John's mentioned that requirement solicitation normally would be the business analyst's role. If you have a BA on your project, if you're lucky enough to have someone performing that function, that is absolutely their role. They should help determine the scope of the project, and they should really help gather or elicit the requirements from the stakeholders as well. But as project managers, we're responsible for the delivery of quality, so we really need to be across them as well. And on some projects, unfortunately, I've had to play the role of BA and PM at the same time, which is pretty tricky. So quality management is about obviously making sure you understand the needs and expectations of your users, that you're following the policies and procedures of the organisation, that you've got good quality processes there, particularly for quality assurance and quality control, so you're not having anything slip through the cracks, that you've got the resources and that you're applying them to be able to achieve your quality objectives, that you've got methods to measure the effectiveness of your quality outcomes, you've got means of preventing non-conformities and eliminating their causes. So if we find that what we're doing is not working and that we're continually getting non-conformities, then we've got to fix that. We can't just keep fixing the non-conformities as we spit them out. We've got to make sure that we are doing something to correct that, and applying that as a process for continuous improvement. Project management, obviously we have a definite start and a definite end to our projects, but we should also be making sure that we are continually improving the quality of our project outcomes as well. So this is a slide on collecting requirements, but if you're not doing that, if you've got a BA on your project, that's great. But really requirements just define what the product is going to look like at the end. Just make sure that you're keeping to the scope and keeping to the charter of your project. Make sure you've got a means of validating them via the sponsor and the steering committee, and just watch out for any contradicting or competing requirements that your stakeholders might give you. So if someone says they want it to be black and the other person says they want it to be white, are they both going to be happy with grey, or are you going to have to do something to kind of, fix those requirements? And of course, this is the BA's domain, of course, but, there's a number of different ways you can elicit stakeholder requirements out of the stakeholders. Procurement is the next thing that we need to really focus on here in this performance domain, and procurement is getting hold of or acquiring goods and services from outside the organisation for the purpose of the project. So ordinarily, the resources that we would use on the project might be part of the project or part of the project team. So anything that we need to get from outside the organisation or outside the project team, we would regard as procurement. Contracting is part of that process, so that's entering into legally binding contracts with preferred sellers for goods and services, but procurement is obviously much bigger than that. It's not just the contracting side of things, but it's all the things that we need to do to actually make that acquisition in the first place. So think about things like shortlisting sellers, tender processes, all of those sorts of things, not just the contract management side of things itself. As project managers, we're sometimes expected to be across contracting and contracts and procurement, and try to keep it simple, but I would definitely recommend to you that if there is a large and complex contract as part of your project, that you do get legal advice on that rather than try to do it yourself. We need to put together a procurement plan which sets out what we're going to buy, when we're going to buy it, in what quantities, what process we're going to use to do the procurement. So there's lots of different ways we can go about it. For example, you can go out for tender, or you can, get quotes. A lot of times that's going to be dictated by your organisation's policies and procedures. You don't necessarily always get to choose how you're going to go about it. And there's different risks and different, benefits of the different approaches that you can use there. But, you'll usually have to fall in with the organisation's, procurement or purchasing department and coordinate the procurement with your other project aspects as well. So, for example, if I need supplies in September, I might need to order them by July. So if I look forward in my project schedule and see that I'm going to need particular resources by a certain date, then I've got to sort of work out, procurement working backwards from there when I'm going to need to start those processes to get the goods on the ground ready to go. We need to think about any constraints or assumptions related to procurement as well. Sometimes procurement can be quite a dangerous minefield, because you're going out there, you're effectively giving control of the part of the project to someone else, a contractor or a supplier. So, being very, very careful about that. And just really thinking through, what am I looking for here in a seller or a supplier? What sort of things are important to me? So I know a lot of local councils have, when they go out for tender and things like that, they will apply a particular weighting for a local company because they want a local person to get the contract rather than an outside person. So, not always, it's not the only factor, but it's a pretty important factor. And so they might allow sort of a 15% weighting or something like that for a local contractor to be used. I would always recommend developing a procurement statement of work. Get it straight out of the project scope baseline, but looking at the portion of the project scope that's going to be delivered by this contract. So, using your overall project scope as the guidance of your procurement statement of work. I think you do have to be a little bit careful with procurement. Sometimes there's a lot of commercial in confidence information and things like that that can go into these documents. You do need to give your prospective sellers enough information to determine whether or not they can meet your needs. So you can't just sort of keep them in the dark and tell them nothing. They are going to need some information about the project in order to be able to say, yes, we can do the job, or no, we can't. But just be really careful about what level of detail, you do provide to them, because some information, obviously you wouldn't want to get out there in the commercial field. Think about whether or not you want other things other than the product itself or the service itself. Do you want performance reporting? Do you want warranty support, some of those sorts of things. If you do, include them in your statement of work for procurement, and you'll get there. Some of the typical things that you'll put in there are things like specifications, the quantity of the product, any quality levels that you might need to be achieved, so benchmarks, Australian standards, whatever. Any performance data, the period of work, the work location, basically any other requirements that you're going to need there to be able to work out, what do I need to do to get hold of those products. All right, so we might stop there and just see if there's any other questions.
We've got some great questions, I think,
Excellent.
Karen, actually.
All right.
More popping up all the time. I'm going to start with this one, which is a really typical one, but I think you hear it so much in business of all kinds. This is from Stephen. I hear under promise and over deliver quite often by middle management. Do you subscribe to this view?
I think of quality as a target in project management. So a lot of people talk about quality as a bar to clear. So they think about, okay, here's the level of quality that I need to deliver. So if I overdo it, then, my stakeholders will give me a big clap and everyone will be really happy. The problem with that is that quality costs money. And so if you are over delivering to any sort of large extent over and above what's expected, then you're spending money that you haven't been really authorised to spend, and you're taking time that you shouldn't have taken. So the idea of project management is particularly with some of the more agile methods, like, your leans and things, is to actually reduce waste and to be able to get the right amount of quality for the money that you have and the time that you have. So rather than over deliver and thinking about quality as this bar that you've got to clear by, as much as you can clear it by, start thinking about start thinking about quality as a target that you need to hit. And the closer you can get to that target, the less money and less time you're using up that you really don't need to, and you're still getting, everything right on the money.
I think you're also probably in the boat where middle management in particular is using it as a way of managing expectations. It's more about the under promising than the over delivering.
Definitely. Yeah. And stakeholder expectations is, it's really important. We talked about it a fair bit last week as well, that we really need to make sure we understand what the stakeholders want, and then do as much as what we can to deliver to that. But where stakeholders are not going to get what they want, where that you haven't got the budget or the time or whatever to be able to stretch, it's important, if you've got those good stakeholder relationships, that you can go back and talk to them about the constraints you've got on your project and say, look, we're just not going to be able to get that. And try to set those expectations at a reasonable level to start with.
Yeah. And while we're on stakeholders management, and by the way, John, quite right. If you mentally substitute quality to spec, I suppose it has become a bit easier in some respects. But in stakeholders management, Jessica's asking, what can the project manager do if there's a change of product owner with different expectations of what product quality is? How do you get around that? What's the thinking process to manage that or resolve it?
So I'd review the quality requirements again. So sometimes things need to change on a project, either because a new person has come on who has the power to influence your project, or because the organisation, might not even be because of that, it might be because the organisation's strategic needs have changed. So we should always be prepared to make changes. Obviously at certain points of the delivery in that delivery domain, we've gotten past the point where we can change things in some aspects, and that's okay. But a review of the quality requirements from time to time, and if things need to change, and yes, it is a lot of work for us to change that, but if there's a clear benefit to the organisation, then we shouldn't, we shouldn't be rejecting that idea. We should be looking at it. That said, a lot of agile methods now subscribe to that process of, if it's no longer going to fit, or we now want something different, that's okay, we'll change it. But, it costs time and money to do that, of course.
Always. Here's a very straightforward question. Is integrated change control within the domain of delivery or project work in terms of PMBOK 7?
It's under delivery because it's to do with scope. So what we're talking about there is, and for those of you who are kind of translating across from the old PMBOK 6, you'll know that that's part of the scope, and as part of execute, and of course to a certain degree monitor and control as well in your process group. So what we're talking about is changes to scope to ensure that you don't end up with scope creep and that you do end up with, you know, authorised and controlled approaches to scope change. So scope and quality are covered under that delivery performance domain.
Good questions tonight. There's two more that we'll do and then we'll move on. The first one's from Mohammed, and this is another age-old question, I would imagine. At my organisation, there's too much work going on with reduced staff. As a result, there's no definitive procurement plan. Many times it's a case of just trying to wing procurement methods. How the best can the project manager recommend a procurement plan to an organisation that's simple enough, yet agile enough to cater to the multiple needs of vendor engagement and all the rest?
Yeah, that's really, really hard. You know, when you're working in an organisation that doesn't really have clear parameters around procurement, that's a really tough situation because, you know, a lot of times, you know, making those kinds of decisions, you know, you're putting the organisation at considerable risk. And so I would definitely want a framework for that. I would suggest having a chat to your governance layer and try to just fill in the gaps as much as you can. Sit down with them and say, look, you know, this is what I need to be able to do. You know, obviously the organisation doesn't have the framework to support this. So, you know, what can we come up with to minimise the risk on the project? And obviously, you know, you're moving forward with a consciousness that there are some risks there, but at least your sponsor and your steering committee or your governance layer, whoever they are, is aware of what's going on there.
It sounds like the governance layer may not be that strong in that sort of case as well.
Yeah. There's only so much we can do as PMs as well. And I think we would try to obviously, you know, work through the risks at the team level and at the project manager level, but we're responsible for the delivery of the project. That's our role, but we're not accountable because we don't get to make all the decisions, unfortunately. I think there'd be quite a few projects that would be all the better for the project manager being able to make the decisions, but that's, yeah, it's why we have a governance structure and it's how it works, unfortunately.
We'll finish this set of questions with this double banger from Kamal. How much flexibility could you expect in a procurement plan? And secondly, how frequent is it important to measure quality? So let me rephrase that. How frequently should we measure quality in the ongoing project?
Okay, so the first one on the procurement, just give me that one again, Shane.
How much flexibility could you expect in a procurement plan?
So I've seen procurement plans that have lots and lots of detail. I've had some that have been fairly light. A couple of things. Firstly, the product that you're going to purchase and how much detail you need to be able to give suppliers so that they can give you an answer as to whether or not they can fulfil your requirements. Secondly is the organisation's policies, procedures and procurement framework. Lots of organisations have their own procurement plan templates. So it's just a matter of you know, looking up the policy, filling out the template and you know, applying it as best you can to the project. Other organisations I've worked in don't have anything at all, and so it's, you know, pretty much up to you to come up with whatever you can. And like with all of these things, it's really, you know, the amount of detail is the amount of detail you need to get the job done. So for some projects with lots and lots of delicate and intricate procurement requirements, you'd end up with quite a big plan, and for others that have got, you know, less or more simple procurement needs, you'd end up with just a more broad kind of strategy document about this is how we're going to go about it. It's just enough for the team to be able to decide, you know, make the day-to-day decisions on how you're going to go about it. And the second question, Shane? How
often should you measure quality in the project?
Yeah, so that one's again a matter for what it is you're measuring. So it depends on what it is and how critical it is as well. So quality costs money, but also measuring quality costs money as well. So we're about to talk about this measurement performance domain. Every time you do a measurement, you know, you kind of, you know, you're adding more resources and adding more time and costing yourself more money. So for the really critical things, you know, as often as is needed to make sure and to satisfy yourself and your stakeholders that the quality is there. But, you know, it's a bit like the stakeholders. The more important and the more powerful they are, the more attention they get. The less powerful, the less attention they get. So it's a bit like that with the quality stuff as well.
Great. Well, let's move on and thanks. They're great questions tonight.
Yeah, very good questions, very insightful questions. So the next one that we're going to talk through, the second last one, is the measurement performance domain. So once we've done the work and we've done the project delivery stuff, we end up with, you know, outcomes, obviously. And you know, part of what we're trying to do is prevent problems by planning really carefully and by doing our quality assurance as we go and maintaining our scope of work and, you know, all of those sorts of things. But just because we do everything to prevent issues and to try and carefully, you know, roll our project out doesn't necessarily mean that we are all going to get, you know, a 100% perfect outcome every time. So we have the measurement performance domain, which is really about the checking. So this is sort of aligned to the old PMBOK 6 monitoring and controlling process group, if you like, if those of you are trying to kind of translate as we go along. Some things in PMBOK 6 7 have a good kind of alignment with stuff from 6, and others are kind of a bit of a, I got that out of nowhere, but anyway. So this one's all about the activities and functions that are associated with really assessing how the project has performed or is performing, so that in the event that we're not getting the outcomes that we want, so we're not getting the quality requirements met, or we're not getting the budget's not working well, or the scope's not working well, or the schedule's not working well rather, or the team aren't performing well, or whatever the area of project management that we've discussed thus far, if something's not working, we've got to be prepared to tweak it and make changes to it. And so this is the process that gives us the information upon which to base those decisions, and also the ability to go ahead and make the changes that we might need to change. So, you know, to do this, obviously, we need a reliable understanding of the status of the project, like how is the project going? Is it running to scope, to schedule, to budget? We obviously need a mechanism by which we will get information or data that we can create information from that's going to facilitate effective decision making. So if we've got rubbish data and, you know, we're going to end up with rubbish decisions, what we really need to do there is make sure that we've got, you know, really good quality information that we're relying upon to facilitate really good decision making. So whilst we don't get to make the bigger ticket decisions, that's stuff for the governance layer, the sponsor, the steering committee, we do have to make day-to-day decisions. And so, you know, obviously we want to set ourselves up with a framework that allows us to do that. But we also need to make sure we are reporting up to the governance layer, the sponsor, the steering committee, whoever that might be, so that we're giving them good recommendations upon which to base their decision making, because they're going to be accountable for the project. So a lot of this is timely and appropriate actions to keep the project on track. If you measure too early, you may not get the full picture. If you measure too late, you know, the horse is bolted. So this is a matter of, you know, measuring at the right time, measuring the right thing. Oftentimes we'll go and perform measurements on things that are pretty useless, and other times, you know, things will sort of get past the keeper, and we realise that after it's too late, we probably should have had a closer eye at that at the time. So it is about achieving targets, or determining if you are achieving targets, which is partially why we have a plan in the first place. So if you go back to the planning performance domain that we talked about last week, we're talking about how, you know, there was a twofold purpose to having the plan. It's about, you know, giving your project team something to work towards, but also at the same time, you know, giving yourself a benchmark as well, so that when you come to doing the measurement performance domain, you know, you can determine, was I successful or was I not successful? And the more detailed we make our plans, the easier it is to do that measurement. You know, if we're saying things like, oh, I want a, you know, really durable pair of shoes, when we come to the measurement performance domain, that becomes quite tricky then, because we've got some stakeholders who say, oh, I only wore them for 3 months and then they fell apart. And other stakeholders that go, 3 months, that's great. You know, I wish I could get 3 months. I only got, you know, 2 weeks out of the last pair or whatever. So we do need to make sure that, you know, that we are generating business value in the eyes of the stakeholders who determine what value means. And that's that whole under promise, over deliver thing that we talked about before. So, you know, making sure that we've got reliable information there for decision making, also reliable information upon which to make some forecasts, as much as, you know, making forecasts can be done in this volatile business environment that we operate in, but being able to evaluate where we're up to on the project. We usually use the SMART acronym for our KPIs for our project. So as I said before, you know, if we say we want a durable pair of shoes, what does that mean? So this is the SMART acronym, or mnemonic. So we want our results to be specific. So you know, exactly, you know, which pair of shoes are we talking about? We want it to be measurable. So, you know, it's 3 weeks worth of wear, or 3 months worth of wear, or, you know, 150,000 steps, or whatever you want to say. It's achievable. It has to be achievable. So we don't want to set people up for failure. We don't want to make our goal too far or too hard to achieve. Otherwise, you know, we won't end up with success. It has to be relevant to the project, of course, so within the scope of the project, and timely or time bound as well. So by when do we want it? I have seen other versions of SMART, but yeah, apply those as you wish. But a lot of organisations do subscribe to the SMART method, because it really makes you think through the exact details of what you're talking about. You don't end up then with quality requirements that say, oh, it'll be a durable pair of shoes, when that means something different to you than it does to me. So we've got to try and be very clear and as unambiguous as possible. So some of the things that the project manager will do in this measurement performance domain, obviously we've got to make sure that the project team's undertaking the activities and accomplishing the project objectives. We're going to lead the project team and manage the project team members as well, which can mean measuring performance, not just measuring whether or not we've met the quality requirements, but also determining whether or not the project team have done the work that they need to do to get the job done, and if they've performed satisfactorily or not. Manage and maintain our communication channels, generate this performance data, you know, manage risks, manage sellers and suppliers, you know, all of that sort of stuff as well. And very importantly, down the bottom, documenting lessons learned. So in all projects, there are things that go well and there are things that don't go so well. So we call these lessons learned or learnings, and it's really important for the team, regardless of whether you're doing a waterfall project where you're doing the whole project and then you're reflecting on the lessons learned at the end, or you're doing an agile project where you do a review and a retrospective at the end of each iteration, that you're learning your lessons and that you're documenting those so that future projects or future, you know, teams or even your own team for the next sprint or next cycle or whatever can look at that and sort of hopefully know where you went well and where you didn't go well and get something out of that. And hopefully people do use them. I do know a lot of organisations that don't use them. And I think that's really unfortunate, because it's a great asset to have. One of the things that we will need to do in this measurement performance domain is set up some sort of a status report or a dashboard that tells us about the performance of the project. So old school project managers, we're used to calling these status reports, but these days we've all got these wonderful pieces of software that have got a dashboard on them, and we don't need to sort of, you know, spend hours or days of our time, you know, putting together status reports from various different, you know, pieces of software. We can click a button and it all just, you know, comes up for us, and we've just got to check that it's right and submit it. But usually the things that we would include in status reports or dashboards are, you know, what percentage of the work has been completed, how we're tracking towards any KPIs, you know, what performance measures that, you know, we've used there, technical performance measures or others, to determine whether or not we're on track or not on track. Actual start and finish dates of tasks and activities, number of change requests, number of defects, actual costs and actual durations of work. So what we're doing here is saying to our sponsor or steering committee, here's where the project's up to as at this day. And they can look at that and determine, I don't think this project's performing very well, or gee, I really think that's you know, that we need to do more there or less there or whatever. And ultimately they're accountable for the project, so they'll guide and direct the project manager and the project team to what needs to happen there. Part of our role as project managers is to keep the schedule under control, so checking that the work's actually being done, but also, you know, making sure that in the event that we're falling behind, that, you know, we get a change request in there to our sponsor or steering committee for more time if needed, and that we're also, you know, measuring the performance of our project team as well. And in the event that people are constantly falling behind, either we tweak the schedule and be more realistic about it, or we, you know, start to performance manage those people if we think that they're taking too long. I want to include some slides on schedule variance and cost variance. These are never popular. No one loves the formulas, but if you're going to sit the PMP exam anytime in the future, you'll need the formulas for schedule variance and cost variance. And you'll need to know a term called earned value as well. Now, obviously, this is not project management fundamentals. If it was, I'd go into that with you in a bit more detail. This is just a short course on the PMBOK 7. But earned earned value is the value of what you've created thus far in the project, essentially. Okay, so it's the value of everything that you've done to date. So we calculate our schedule variance by taking our earned value and minusing off our planned value. So for example, if I plan to have done 4 weeks worth of work, okay, that was my earned value was what I thought was going to, what has taken 4 weeks. And then I've take off my planned value, which is I thought it would have taken 3 weeks to do that. Then 4 minus 3 equals 1. So anytime that you end up with a negative number, it means you're behind the schedule. And anytime you end up with a positive number, it means you're ahead of schedule. And if you end up with a 0, you're right where you should be. Now, then we also have cost variance, okay? So we can measure the variance to the schedule, but we should also measure the variance to the budget as well. And if you've ever seen status reports with a traffic light system, what we mean by that is that red light means you're already over schedule or over budget. Amber traffic light means that you're foreseeing a problem in the future that will mean you'll be over budget or over schedule, or you're within your tolerances. And green means you're fine, you're okay at the moment, that you're either on or under budget or on or ahead of schedule. Okay, so that's fine. EV minus AC is the cost variance formula. So EV is the value of what I've created so far. AC is the costs that I've spent in order to create it. So if I've created $4,000 worth of value and it's only cost me $3,000 of my budget, then I've got positive $1,000 left over. Okay, so that means that I'm underspent by $1,000. I've got $1,000 more in my budget than what I should have had. So what's really important to remember when you're doing your figures is that you're using earned value and not just doing calculations of what's left in the pot. Because just because you've got 90% of your money left doesn't mean you've done 90%, just because you've spent 90% of your money doesn't mean you've got 90% of your work done. And just because you've got 10% left in the pot doesn't mean that you've only got 10% of the work left to be done. So earned value calculations allow you to work out exactly what you have done so that you can take away the planned value in the case of schedule variance, or you can take away the actual cost in relation to cost variance and work out whether or not you've got enough money or enough time left to be able to do the job. So just to give you an indication, sorry, my mouse is playing up, but some projects have got a cost curve that where the amount of money, so I'll just I might just draw on my screen if that's all right, just very quickly. Right, so this is money. All right, and this is time. And some projects have got a cost curve that's pretty all straight. Right, so if you're 6 months into a 12-month project, you've spent $100,000 out of your $200,000 budget, you're exactly where you need to be. Happy days. But some projects have a cost curve where most of the expenditures incurred at the start of the project and then peters off towards the end. So if you've only spent 50% of your budget and you're halfway through your project, you're in really, really good shape because there's not much more to go. Whereas some projects have a cost curve that looks like that. And so if you're 50% spent at that point, you're in real trouble because the majority of your expenditure is kind of yet to come. So we've just got to be really careful that we understand exactly where we're up to on our project, not where, just looking at how much money's left in the bank and going, yeah, we'll get there because we're 6 months into the project and we've still got half the money left. It doesn't necessarily mean anything. So the other thing we've got to be aware of is tolerances and contingencies. So contingency is an additional amount we add to the budget or to the schedule to guide for unforeseen circumstances. If we've got a high level of confidence in our project, then that means we don't need a lot of contingency. But if we don't have much confidence in our estimates and we're a bit doubtful about whether or not we're right, we should obviously add more contingency. And tolerance is the acceptable limit that we can be over the budget without needing intervention. If we find that we are over budget or over schedule or, reporting amber at any one time, we might consider a change request at that point. If we're already over budget, over schedule and reporting red, we should do a change request to get that back to baseline again. And of course, then we've got our lessons learned. So, whether it's at the end of the project or just at the end of an iteration of a project, we should be sitting down with the team and saying what went well, what didn't go well. If we had our time over again, what would we do the same? What would we do differently? And really recording those, as I said before, as a useful asset for other project managers to look at in the future. So that's the measurement one. Have we got any questions about measurement before I move on to my last one, which is uncertainty?
We have a stack of questions here. Let's start with one from Jessica again. What are the usual measurement tools or methodology used by a PM?
So next week, we're going to talk extensively about methods. So if you can tune into that one next week, Jess, we'll talk about all of the different methods and when they tools and when they might be applied. But there's a whole range of things, more than I can cover in a sort of a 2-minute response to your question, where we'll go through all of the different tools and artifacts and models that we use to do all those measurements.
Sorry, I probably should have picked that up from our earlier conversation.
Okay.
Could we consider, this is from Enrico, could we consider that the measurement performance domain is the analytics or BI of PM?
Yeah, it is. Obviously, there's some intuition that you need to apply there as well, but it is very much about measuring, here's what I planned at the beginning of my project or at the beginning of this sprint cycle or whatever it is that you're doing. Here's what I planned for, here's what I've gotten. Is that in alignment or do I need to do something? So really measurement is just about getting the information in order to be able to then go ahead and make the changes. So if I do my own value calculations and I calculate that I'm behind schedule and I'm overspent on my budget, that then gives me the impetus to go, okay, well, I'm going to do a change request and I'm going to go to my sponsor. I'm going to ask for another $30,000. I'm going to ask for another 3 weeks and I'm going to re-baseline my project, get things back on track. And there may be very good reasons why that's happened that I can explain in my change request. So really, the measurement performance domain is about comparing your plan with your actual results, and then making the necessary tweaks and changes to get things back where they need to be.
There's a couple of people here asking what's essentially the same question, which is earned value. Is that an estimated value, or is that derived from something? It sounds like it's something that should be derived from your costings anyway.
Yeah, it is. So in some projects like construction or whatever, we have a quantity surveyor who comes in and does that and who makes a measurement of what value has been created at that point. So that's how, if you borrow money to build a house, for example, that's how a bank will determine whether or not to give you the next progress payment or to give you your builder the next progress payment, because they'll send out a quantity surveyor who'll look at the work done and say that's worth this amount of money. So yes, they can have the next drawdown or whatever. But for most of us, it's really just a calculation on what if we had to stop the project today, where would we be, kind of thing.
It's what sunk cost, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll answer a couple more quickies and then we'll move on. They may not be that quick. Any tips for encouraging people on how they're going to use or discuss the learnings from one project to the next?
Yeah, look, every organisation deals with this differently. Some organisations are very open about it and they publish the lessons learned or the learnings, and people can just go and get them from a database and go for their lives. Others like to sort of, house them in the PMO, and if you're going to run a similar project, they'll let you see them. It very much depends on the organisation. Some don't even really use them at all. So project managers and project teams, particularly if they're external project managers, will go to the trouble of spitting out these big lessons learned documents and going through the process, only for some people just to not even bother with it, which is a real shame. The other thing is that some people don't like or some organisations don't like it because it can, it's for mature organisations that have an understanding that it's not a blame game and that it is very much looking at and not just focusing on what didn't go well, but also focusing on the things that did go well as well. But at the start of any project, I like to see if there's any lessons learned around and see what I can get, because any work that I don't have to redo or any amount of intelligence, if you like, that I can rely on, I'll certainly be taking that opportunity.
I suppose there's an element of confidentiality if you're an external person, but then that's what people are paying you for. If you're coming in to externally manage your product, they're paying you exactly to use that, aren't they? To use those learnings.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I'm bringing in learnings from my past career as well. So, you know, and sharing some information with them that might help them do the job better. So, you know, obviously, if we do go in as consultants, most of the time we're under a confidentiality agreement anyway.
Okay. And one more question, then we'll move on. What about longer term projects that spread over a few years, transformation projects, etc., and the budget is set yearly? How do we estimate the project during the planning phase?
Yeah, so I think in that particular scenario, having an agile approach to the project budget really works well. And knowing that you're on an annual cycle and just trying to work to that. I know lots of agile project managers try to, as much as they can, you know, align capability, delivery, and deployment with budgetary cycles for that reason, because it just makes it a bit neater. To try and do that, but it can be tricky. You know, lots of organisations make their decisions about their budget, you know, now for the next financial year after the one that we're just about to have, and it's pretty difficult to forecast, not just for the project manager, but for those even making those decisions that far in advance.
Great. I will just take this opportunity to pop into the flow, and sorry to interrupt you, just to remind people, I spoke about a little bit at the beginning, but we are opening our survey after this week. So we'd love people to answer our survey, and I'm sure Kit will pop it into the chat at some point. So you can just click on it, but it is in the Learn.IT Masters domain. And yeah, if you fill out the survey, then we can actually understand what we're doing well and what we can do better. So that would be fantastic if you took a couple of minutes to do that. But thanks, Karen. I will get out of your way again.
No worries. Thank you, Shane. So this is our last performance domain. This is the 8th and final performance domain. As I said, we'll talk about tailoring and the models, methods, and artifacts next week. This is the uncertainty performance domain, most closely aligned with the old risk knowledge area of project management. So it is dealing with risk and uncertainty on our project. And for those of you who aren't aware, when we talk about risk in the project management realm, we're not just talking about things that could potentially go badly. We're also talking about things that might go well as well. So there is that sort of dual nature of risk on a project. So when we talk about risks, we're talking about both the threats to being able to achieve our project outcomes, but also opportunities as well that might enhance our project outcomes as we go. So this execution of this performance domain requires us to have an ongoing awareness of the project environment, both internal to the project and the organisation, but also the external environment as well, which is, you know, that sort of PESTLE analysis stuff that we might do in general management. Being able to proactively explore and respond to uncertainty. And it's tricky, right? So uncertainty, as we would know, and it's getting worse instead of better, or more difficult instead of more easy, to face the challenges of very volatile business conditions. That is the way it is. You know, you look at what's happened in Australia and around the world just in the first half of this year, and it's crazy to think what we've got to try and keep up with. But you know, with projects, we're part of an organisation. We're part of a world, a broader world, and so everything that happens, you know, is interdependent with the project. And so we've got to be really aware of that and really careful about how we do things. We've got to be able to anticipate and be proactive about risks and threats and opportunities. And make sure we're minimising, you know, the impact of the negative and maximising the impact of the positive, I suppose. Obviously, we've given ourselves some contingency and we've got some tolerance up our sleeves for costs and schedules and things like that. But, you know, that's not the only part that we need to be aware of when it comes to uncertainty. So just a bit of a definition of project risk there. It's an uncertain event, basically. If it does occur, it'll have either a positive or negative impact on your project outcomes. And, you know, the old traditional or waterfall project management methodology was all about planning your risks at the beginning of the project, whereas the agile project management method, you know, really is about, you know, only, you know, having to plan the risks for the iteration that you're working on at the present time. But there is that sort of broader overview of uncertainty as well with agile projects, knowing that they're only going to be funded for the next 12 months or this budget cycle, this is how much you've got, and things like that we just talked about can be real issues. So, it is about maximising the probability and impact of the positive events and minimising the negative, the probability and impact of the negative events. So you'll see that what I'm about to talk about is two-pronged. One is the likelihood or the probability of something happening, and the other one is the impact or the consequence if it does happen. So they're the kind of two factors. Now, those of you who've been around risk management from a workplace health and safety perspective, none of what I'm about to say is going to be news to you, except with a project, we've just got to apply it with a bit of a project lens on it, that's all. So all projects are progressed with a consciousness of risk. There is not a single sponsor or steering committee member who could look at you with a straight face and say this is a risk-free project, because there's no such thing. All of them are going to, have benefits and rewards for the organisation, hopefully, if they go well, but there will always be a risk. And that risk is, I'm going to put this time, this money, these resources on the line, and I'm hopefully going to get this outcome. But I may not. And, all governance personnel understand that, and therefore risks should be approached on a rational basis. We shouldn't just be looking at the risks at the beginning of the project and then popping the risk management plan in the drawer and hoping for the best. New risks can come, old risks can, go in terms of we get to the point of the project where they can no longer happen or impact us. And so therefore, we don't delete them, but we just, effectively don't need to keep an eye on them anymore. And existing risks can change in either their likelihood or their impact as well. So the idea is that we'll try and identify them early. We'll work out what risk treatments are appropriate, and like quality, risk costs money and time. So we don't want to go and spend, oodles of money and time, on risks that aren't actually going to happen, or if they do happen, they're not going to have much of an impact. So there is that optimization of resources to risk management as well, and that we're making decisions based on an awareness of the risks that we might face. So our process is there, obviously, to do some risk management planning in the upshot at the start, to identify our risks, to analyse the probability or the likelihood of each risk occurring, to analyse and evaluate the impact or the consequence of each of the risks, apply an appropriate treatment, assess the outcome of that, determine if it's worked or not worked, take appropriate responses, and then continue to monitor and control project risk as you go. So identifying project risks, obviously, as I said, do it ongoing. Don't just do it once and then forget about it. Utilise the project team. Think about the assumptions that you're making. So every time we make a decision in project management, we're assuming some certain things to be true. What if we're wrong? And look for risks in every task. Get out your work breakdown structures and your project schedules and say, okay, what could go wrong here? What could go wrong here? What could go wrong here? So I probably drive my project teams a bit bonkers at the beginning of every meeting, because I look at the schedule and I look at the tasks that are coming up in the next week, and I say, okay, what are the risks in each of these tasks? And we literally go through it with a fine-tooth comb and try to think about as much as we can. Just because risks do impact you doesn't mean you're a poor project planner. Sometimes risks are not able to be foreseen. And that's just the way of it. But you can try to minimise potentially negative risks, and also pick up on some opportunities as the project goes if you are on the lookout for opportunities, and if your team's constantly on the lookout for opportunities. So examples of some risks: corporate decisions, economic, financial risks, operational or technical risks, socio-political risks, employee relations, resource issues, environmental risks, time and delays. That's by no means an exhaustive list, but it's a list. What we need to do once we've identified these risks is work out how likely are they to happen. And usually an organisation will have a risk management framework and will have a table in it, something similar to this, which means that a level A risk is almost certain to happen, a level D risk is unlikely, a level E risk is rare. Okay, and it usually will have a description there about what rare means, what likely means, what possible means. Okay, there's no right or wrong with this. It's just simply what your organisation uses in terms of its risk management framework. And most of the time they are written for workplace health and safety rather than for project management. But we've got to use what we're given. Assessing impact is about consequence All right, so this is if it did occur, if this risk came and happened, how bad or good would that outcome be? So a level 1 is insignificant, a level 3 is a moderate, a level 5 is catastrophic. Now, I've seen organisations just use, high, medium, low. They don't use numbers or letters. That's totally fine as well. Again, it's whatever your organisation uses. But what they do is they take a cross section of this to work out the overall risk rating. All right, so a B, a likely risk that has a moderate consequence, is high, whereas a possible risk that would have a catastrophic outcome would be extreme, and a rare risk that would have minor outcomes or minor impact would be low. So, by working on those two axes, coming to a conclusion about, the overall risk analysis. And so these extreme risks, these are the ones that we want to, put our money into and our time into resolving. The highs are the ones we probably need some senior management intervention. The moderates and the lows, we'd probably be able to deal with them at the project manager level or even the project team level. And we wouldn't be spending, huge amounts of money on these low risks because, even if they do happen, they're not going to have a huge impact on the project anyway. So it's a bit like our stakeholder engagement. We want to go where we're going to get the most bang for our buck here. So we're going to respond appropriately depending on what the risk analysis tells us. And then, our strategies here: for negative risks, we should try to avoid, transfer, mitigate. For positive, we should try to exploit, share, or enhance. And the way that we should manage these risks is in a risk register or a risk log. So I set this up at the beginning of the project. If you've got a fancy piece of software that does all of this for you, that's great. But you need to enter them in there to start with. It will help you keep a closer eye on them and will remind you and all that sort of stuff. But back in the day when I started, we used to do our risk registers in Excel spreadsheets, and I think some PMs still do. Just bear in mind, you have to keep on top of this. This is not a set and forget activity. That you do need to make sure that you're on top of it, so that when new risks emerge, you put them straight into the risk register, and from that point in time, you're keeping track of them. That when old risks do go away, because we've moved past that point in the project when they can actually impact us, that we're not just deleting things out of the risk register, because we want to keep all of that really important, rich data there about the risk. All I do is have an open closed sort of toggle switch, and I just close them off when they're, or if I'm using an Excel spreadsheet, I just have an open closed column and I'll just close and then sort by the open ones. But I want to maintain all that information, such as when the risk was identified, who identified it, what we did about it. Okay, so that's why we don't delete anything. The other thing is existing risks can change in nature. They can become more likely to happen or less likely to happen, or they could have more or less of an impact on the project if they were to happen at various different points in time. So, some people like, or some project managers like to record their risks and issues in separate logs, and some like to keep them together. It doesn't really matter. It's a preference thing, really. The difference between a risk and an issue is a risk is an uncertain event that may or may not happen. An issue has already happened and you are already dealing with it. Okay, so that's the only difference. That's a simple example of one. Every risk should have a risk number, that saves people saying, that risk we've got, it's about halfway down the page, it's risk 47, and then everyone knows it's risk 47. We give them all a name and a description, how likely they are to happen. If they do happen, what sort of impact they're going to have. You can add other columns into this as well, such as, who raised the risk, the date they raised it, all of that sort of stuff. The risk rating, depending on the likelihood and the consequence, using that risk matrix that we had before, we can say whether it's a high, medium, or a low, what treatment we're using, and then, whether it's open or closed. You can have whether it's a risk or an issue. You can add all kinds of things into something like this. But I mean, this is a very simple example, but it's just how to present it so you can keep track of it. It's really important that you keep track of all of these things. And if you don't, then you're going to end up with, risks, occurring that shouldn't be occurring. And the other thing is, maybe you want to put a column in here about whether it's an opportunity or a threat as well, because depending on that will depend on the approach you take to it, obviously. And this is my last slide. Risks are our greatest teacher. They are just awesome in some ways in terms of teaching us things that we didn't know. They can really sink a project though, and if we're not looking out for the positive opportunities, we can really kick ourselves at the end of the project. We've missed an opportunity to do something great as well. We usually capture our risks in the closure report at the end, any sort of outstanding ones, like the person who's taking over the project or the handover of the asset or whatever, to know that these are the risks or whatever that we had at the end. And as I said, putting those in some sort of a lessons learned as well can be helpful for future projects. So that's it from me. Any questions about the uncertainty performance domain, Shane? Have you got any there?
Oh, yeah, there's a stack. And of course, everybody knows the way things run now, because we're about to close the questions in about 30 seconds. And there's been a little flurry just as we've been speaking then.
Good.
So let's start with Jeffrey's question, which is the most recent actually. How has the recent pandemic impacted real-time ongoing projects? Are there examples of how projects address this sort of uncertainty?
Yeah, look, I think COVID taught us all a thing or two about just about everything. It's so hard, isn't it? I mean, these are things, this is the type of risk that, as I was saying before, it's, you know, what can you do? It's one of those things that it really has impacted lots of projects. I would dare say, this is probably a pretty sweeping statement, but I'd say it's impacted every project in some way. There would be scarcely a project that hasn't been impacted in some way or another, whether it's, you know, even if it's just in a minor way as a result of COVID. So there really isn't a lot we can do about that kind of uncertainty. It's something that, you know, we now know about it, and we would now perhaps put that sort of thing in our plans. But, you know, going back to the start of 2020, could we possibly be expected to have any kind of idea of something like that? No. So it's hard. And the knock-on effects of that as well. There are things that have happened that people, you know, even at the beginning when we knew we were in a pandemic, could not have possibly be expected to you know, predict. So it's very difficult from that perspective.
Yeah, I would imagine that even staffing is a major thing. Kevin has asked, and I think you might have answered this really, in rating risk, the impact can be different across the dimensions. For example, something that results in a medical treatment might be moderate, might be an injury, but the reputational damage from that could be high. If you're plotting it on a matrix, how do you reconcile these different impacts into what is a flat rating?
Yeah,
it feels like that's what you did.
Yeah, it sort of is. However, lots of organisations have really, really great risk management frameworks that have different risk categories and allow you to categorise the risk at the same time. And they can be really helpful, because you're sort of saying it's this kind of risk if it's this, but then it's going to have that impact if it's that. So the other thing that a lot of organisations have should have is a measurement after you've applied your treatment as well. That's something else I didn't mention. So that after you've applied your treatment, you might minimise that medical risk down to a lower category. So it's here before the treatment's applied, but there's still a risk. It doesn't go away. It's still there. It's just, you know, less than it was before. And so it's called the ALARP principle, as low as reasonably possible. So our treatments should aim to get to that sort of point, but often there's some residual risk there that we have to analyse and plot the impact of as well.
Mm-hmm. Alison has asked, does PMBOK distinguish between project risk and ongoing operational risk?
So we're only interested in the project risk, but when it comes to doing this closure report here at the end, that can often be the heads up for the person who's going to take over the product at the handover as to some of the risks. We might identify some potential risks during the life of the project. That's where we would put those things. We would let that person who's going to take that product over know about them at that point, but we're not necessarily associated with too much of the in-depth, you know, what are we going to do about it? It kind of becomes their problem as to what's done about it. But if we identify it, we'd certainly highlight it for sure.
Excellent. Great answers. Good questions tonight as well. I've not seen all of the other questions, but they seem to be on point pretty much here. George K, how much should the contingency budget be in terms of percentage? You know, as a rule of thumb,
It's hard. Every project's going to be different, and every sponsor or governance personnel are going to have their ideas about how much contingency they're going to allow. I always draw a direct correlation between contingency and confidence. So a lot of project managers will do, some bottom-up estimating, and then they'll slap a 10 or a 15% contingency on the bottom of that. I find that doesn't give accurate project budgets or schedules. I find the best way is to analyse, but this takes time, of course, as well, to analyse each of the elements and say, how certain am I about this? So if I've done my estimates and I'm really, really sure that I'm right, so I've got expert opinions, I've done some parametric estimates, I've done some, looking back at past projects, and I'm deciding, for example, a task is going to be between 4 and 4.2 weeks in duration. Well, I might just call it 4.2 and move on, and not really give myself much contingency. Whereas if I'm doing those estimating techniques and my confidence level in my estimates is really low, and I'm fairly uncertain, then I'm going to give myself more contingency. So rather than kind of just pick a figure and add a blanket contingency, a much more precise approach is to really think through the confidence levels and really understand that sort of transverse relationship between contingency and confidence. If one's up, the other one should be down, and vice versa.
Craig says, how does a risk that first was an opportunity become a threat, even if it could have benefits to an organisation?
So usually what we're looking at is not risks or not threats that become opportunities, or opportunities that become threats, but really just looking at, this is a threat, how can we minimise it? This is an opportunity, how can we maximise it? But there may be some examples of things that can happen that might start out as a threat and then become an opportunity, or vice versa. But that might happen. But usually when we're doing this, we're sort of looking at how to maximise an opportunity and minimise a risk.
And we have 2 more questions. It appears that we haven't closed off the questions. One has snuck through the gate. Augustina has said, if the stakeholders' demand is more costly than the budget in terms of quality, what should be done? This is more a politics question, I think.
Yeah, look, it can be. And I would simply see whether or not there's merit in what the stakeholders are wanting. And if there is, I might go to my governance personnel and say, look, this is a really great idea Augustina's had here. It's going to cost us an extra $30,000. But look, what this opportunity will create, and see whether or not they've got the appetite for it. They may or they may not. But really, that's all we can do. If the governance personnel say no, obviously they're he who has the gold or she who has the gold makes the rules. So, we would go back to that stakeholder and say, look, it's no on this occasion. However, these are some other options that we might have. Okay, well, I think we're actually done. The Q&A has closed, and that I thought it was a question, but it wasn't. That slipped through. But thank you everyone for coming along tonight. And I'd like to remind you also that if you have still questions that you haven't answered, then by all means, all the forums will be open to have a chat in. And you can also talk to us via our eligibility form on our website to just find out if there's things that would make you eligible for the courses, or you want to ask questions of us. That's a really good way to ask the IT Masters team, and we can often work things out in terms of our courses. Like this course in particular was based around our subject MGI 511, which is Project Management Fundamentals. Is that right, Karen? You're nodding away. Absolutely. And we'll have all the resources up in 24 hours, so it won't be long. They'll all be up there for everybody to relook at. Thank you so much for coming along. Thanks very much to Karen, and especially thanks to Kit, who has made sure that I have not mucked it all up. And a very good night to everyone. Bye.